Let's move on to chapter 2. Okay? In chapter 2, we're going to start at the beginning. In the beginning, there was life. Right? When we started, we talked about how all life is organized. Correct? Yes? Do you remember that?
Yes.
Right? And matter and everything else that is part of the biosphere is organized in some way. Right? Organization starts with what?
Categorizing.
What's the smallest thing that's made up of? Okay. Atoms. Okay? And then from atoms, those atoms are going to interact with other atoms and form molecules. Give me an example of a molecule. H2O. Okay? Water. And then those molecules are going to interact together and form bigger molecules, what we call macromolecules. Don't worry about compound. We'll talk about what the difference between a compound and a molecule is. Okay? Macromolecules, those are carbohydrates, proteins, fats, nucleic acids. No, those are macromolecules. We'll talk about the difference between compounds and molecules in a little bit. Okay? And those macromolecules are formed in certain ways to form organelles. Those organelles then form cells. And then we move on to tissues. Right? Right? We follow this along. Atoms, molecules, macromolecules, organelles, and cells. And this is, for the most part, the way we're going to work this. We're going to start at the very smallest thing. We're going to work our way up. We're going to show how atoms interact to form molecules. We'll talk about all the 4 different macromolecules, the different organelles of the cell, and then how the cell functions. Right? We'll talk about photosynthesis, cellular respiration, mitosis, meiosis, genetics. That still is how the cell functions. And then we will start in the second half, in the second semester, talk about tissues, which will lead directly into your human and A&P when you talk about organs and organ systems, and move on. Okay? But for your general bio class, we're going to talk about a lot of this. And in the first semester, then we'll skip over organs, organ systems, organisms, and then talk about ecology and how biological organisms interact. All right? But we have to start at the beginning, and that is atoms. Okay? So, atoms interact based upon the laws of chemistry. And they are bound by the laws of physics. Okay? So this is the part where a lot of chemistry comes into play. All right? And you'll probably be doing, how many of you are in Gen Chem? You'll be doing this at the same time. But we're going to go through it as it's important for biologists. Okay? You'll probably learn a lot more specifics in this in Gen Chem. So, all matter, okay? All matter is composed of chemical elements that are made up of atoms. Give me an example of a chemical element. Okay, helium, He, hydrogen, oxygen, carbon. Separately, those are elements. Okay? An element is a substance that cannot be broken down anymore to its kind of parts and still behave as that. So an element of carbon, elemental carbon, is going to act like carbon. And if you change it anymore, it's going to act like boron, something totally different. Understood? So an elemental carbon is as small as you can get it and have it behave a certain way. That's unique to carbon versus sodium versus helium. Okay? A compound is a substance consisting of two or more elements in a fixed ratio. Give me an example of a compound. H2O is a compound. Okay? Two things together. Now, what's the difference between a compound and a molecule? A compound, H2O, can consist of many, many molecules. If it's still water. Water in your water bottles. Is it water? Yes or no? Yes. And it has billions and billions of little hydrogen attached to oxygen molecules. This is one water molecule, or one, it's still, water in here is a compound, but if I'm talking about the water molecule, I'm talking about its one actual H2O, okay? For the most parts, for all intents and purposes, molecule and compound in this class, that's what we will be used pretty much interchangeably, okay? But understand that there is a difference, all right? I will use molecule exclusively. I won't really talk about compounds. But when you go to chemistry, a compound changes, right? You need to know that difference, okay? But it's in a fixed ratio. 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen, right? CO2, 1 carbon, 2 oxygens. C6H12O6, glucose, 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, 6 oxygens, right? Fixed ratios. Here's your elements that are important: oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen. Look at that. Make up 96% of your body, okay? Including, well, it says including water. Yeah, it includes water. Hydrogen and oxygen are already in there, okay? And then the rest of the body mass is made up of calcium and phosphorus. Where do you find calcium and phosphorus? Anyone have an idea? In your bones, okay? So that still only makes about 2.5 or 2.5% of your body mass, okay? And then the rest: phosphorus, sulfur, sodium, chlorine, magnesium. Then you have trace elements, which are very low: boron, chromium, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? But all of those work together. They're formed in different molecules and compounds to produce your body mass that you're standing here in front of me. Okay? And do all the fun things that you do. Okay? Now, an atom or an element. Its properties, why carbon acts like carbon and why sodium acts like sodium, is dependent upon the structure of its atoms. Okay? So the smallest thing it can be, an atom of carbon, is structured in such a way so that all carbon is composed of those same atoms, and it behaves according to the way carbon behaves. When we change the structure of its atoms, we'll end up changing the way it behaves. All right? So an atom is the smallest unit of matter, still retains the properties of an element. Okay? Atoms have subatomic particles, and there's even, we're going to just talk about the 3 main ones: protons, neutrons, and electrons. Okay? There are even smaller than those. We can talk about quarks and neutrinos and all this other stuff that theoretical physicists are interested in, that are really beyond my comprehension. People much smarter than me work on that stuff. But neutrons, okay, and protons, these two things are found in the inner area, inner portion of the atom, called the nucleus. I'm trying to write not neat up on this so you can see it, but this is the best I can do. Until the iPad comes out with a little better, or I come out with better handwriting, this is the best that's gonna happen, okay? Bear with me, okay? So, the nucleus. The nucleus has protons and neutrons. Neutrons have no electrical charge, but they do have some mass. Protons are positively charged, and electrons, which orbit around the nucleus, okay, they have a negative charge. In the atoms of elements that are not interacting with other atoms, usually the number of protons and the number of neutrons are equal. Okay? Usually, sometimes they have a difference, and we'll talk about what that difference is. Okay? And they also usually have the same number of protons and electrons, so that they are not charged one way. They have a net zero charge. But if I have more protons than electrons, what's my net charge? All together now. Positive, good. And if I have more electrons than protons, what's my net charge?
Negative.
Negative. Okay, thank you. We are all awake. Okay, so here's what it looks like. You have your nucleus. There's a couple different models up there. Who cares what the models are? They're all saying the same thing. Okay, you have 2 protons. You have 2 neutrons. You have 2 electrons. Okay, so here in pink, okay, those two plus signs, what does that mean? Positive, so that is a proton. All right, these other two guys, the two brown, all right, no charge, but they're in the nucleus, so they must be neutrons. And then these two guys that are orbiting around the nucleus are electrons. All right, so we can all identify subatomic particles. Okay, great. Okay, now, an atom of anything, okay, has different numbers of those things. We just did 2 electrons, 2 protons, 2 neutrons. That is the element or an atom of helium. Okay? Helium, atomic number 2. So this is what it looks like, right? So you'll see helium written like this, He, and have a little 2 up here. That's the sign for helium. This is its atomic number. The atomic number equals what? Number of protons. Good. Okay, the number of protons. Okay? The atomic number is equal to the number of protons. Because if I take one of those protons away, what did I do? I changed what the element actually is and the way it behaves. Okay?
Then where does the mass number go?
The mass number is a little bit different. Usually pretty close to the same, right? But the mass number is the protons and neutrons. Okay? So you'll see this kind of shell diagram right here. Whoops. All right, see this shell diagram right there? What do you notice about that? Observations. There's different layers. Okay? There's actually multiple shells. Okay? Now, that first shell, what does the shell represent, first of all? What do the little dots in that shell represent? Electrons. Good. Okay? What about that first shell? It only has how many? 2. Okay? And then how many are in the second shell? 8. Okay, so a first shell is different than the second shell. Actually, the first shell is different than all the subsequent shells. The first shell only can house 2 electrons. Once there's 2 electrons in there, it's full. It is a stable element. What do I mean by stable? As opposed to, the opposite word for stable would be reactive or unstable. If someone's unstable, it's not a good thing. We want stability, right? Especially in terms of atoms. Okay? If that's the goal of atoms is to get to a stable state. So if you have the first shell is filled with 2, and there's no residual electrons or no remainder electrons, is that a stable element? Yes. And then it doesn't interact with a lot of other elements, right? Helium 2 has 2 protons. How many electrons does helium have? How do you know that? Because it usually has the same number of protons and electrons, right? So if it has 2 protons, it probably has 2 electrons. So what would the shell diagram look like? Where am I going to put those 2 electrons? In the first shell. Is that stable? Absolutely. Okay? Now hydrogen has 1 electron, 1 proton. Okay? What's going to happen to that shell? What's it going to look like? Is hydrogen stable? No. What does it want to get to? To what? Once it gets to 2, right? Okay, but hydrogen is a little too small. We'll talk about how it is. So how does it get to be stable? It has to take on an electron, right? Or it could do what? Could give one up. Are there any other shells that's smaller than that? No, it really doesn't want to give up its electron, but it will, and we'll talk about how that works. Okay? Now, let's say we go to atomic number 3, which is lithium. What's going to happen? How many electrons would lithium have? 3. What's going to happen to its shells? What's it going to look like? So 2 electrons in the first shell. What do we do with that extra one? It has to go to the next one. Is that stable? No. What does it need to do to get to a stable state? It gets rid of that 1. It's easier to get rid of the 1 than to gain how many? 7. So if lithium gives up the 1, it then goes down to what? It goes down to the first shell with 2 electrons. Is that stable? Yes. Now, what's the problem? It is positive. Why? Because it has more protons than electrons. Right? And that's what we call an ion. Okay? Ion is a charged element, either positive or negative, right? Because it gave up some. Okay? What we're basically talking about is interactions among atoms. And those interactions form bonds. Right? There's 2 types of bonds. They could be covalent or ionic. We talked about lithium. Lithium with my, 1 there, 1 here, and then our second shell, and it has that 1 electron on the outside, which is going to go away. Right? Do it like this. Okay? Now, lithium could also share electrons. It tends not to because it's just easier for it to give up its electron and then reach a stable state. Okay? That is an ionic bond. Right? So lithium's going to give up its electron, and chlorine over here, which has, I'm just going to draw its outer shell in the form of lovely 7 electrons in its outer shell. So what's the closest state of stability for chlorine? To gain 1. Okay? So the rules for stability for the first shell is 2 electrons. For all subsequent shells, those atoms become stable when 8 electrons are occupying that shell. So once this one comes over from lithium, right, and there, now, what is chlorine in terms of its charge? Becomes negative. Lithium becomes positive, right? Lithium happy? Yes. Chlorine happy? Great. Right, chlorine happy? Yes. So lithium chloride, LiCl, ends up forming what type of bond is this? Is there sharing going on? No. Okay? No sharing. Lithium freely gave up its electron to chlorine. Brett.
I just wanted to confirm that you're saying that if they have like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 shells, they still have to kill 8 for each one of those shells. Only the first one is 2?
Yes.
Okay.
For the most part, the first one's 2, right? And you will go through, if you go through the periodic table, there's some shells that have 18 electrons. Okay? But you don't have to worry about that. Just the rule, or the octet rule states that a shell will achieve a stable state when 8 electrons are occupying that shell. Okay? Then they no longer interact with other elements. Okay? So here's some examples of covalent bonds where they're shared. Okay, here's hydrogen. What do you notice about this little diagram of hydrogen right there? It's covalent. How many electrons are present? 2. 1. So how is it the 2 atoms now are stable? Because the electrons actually occupy both atom shells. They are shared. Right? Shared residence. They're shared between 2 electrons. Then you have oxygen. Same thing. They're actually sharing. How many electrons are they sharing? 4. That's what we call a double covalent bond. Because 2 pairs of electrons are being shared between the 2 atoms. All right? And then you have water. And you can get all the way down here to methane, which actually is, 4 shared electrons. Right? 4 bonds. All right? We'll talk more about covalent bonds on Friday. All right? We'll go through polar and nonpolar covalent bonds and so on. Questions? Okay. So, we left off, we talked about the structure of atoms, and we basically went through how bonding occurs. And what did we say about bonding? Why does bonding occur?
To make it so that there's the correct number of electrons in the atom shell.
A correct number of electrons in the outer shell, which leads to what? Stability. Okay? So the goal of all atoms is to reach a stable state. And to do that, they interact with other atoms and form bonds. Okay? One type of bond is sort of what we discussed the other day, ionic bonds, where there's an exchange. Remove one electron from one atom, outer shell of one atom, to the outer shell of another atom, and we reach that steady state. Okay? So to reach that steady state, we can exchange electrons, or atoms can share electrons. Okay? Now, sharing electrons can become a little bit testy. I like my electrons, you like your electrons, we'll share them, but who gets equal custody? Is there equal custody, or is there someone gets more time than others? And that all depends on a measure of attraction called electronegativity. Okay? Electronegativity is basically an attraction of CF5. Whose is this?
I have practice right after.
My daughter made me buy her a CF9. Anyways, sorry, I digress. Okay? So, electronegativity is a measure of attraction. How electronegativity is an atom's attraction for electrons in a covalent bond. Okay? So if you have two atoms that have equal electronegative measurements, okay, that means they're going to pull on that electron about the same amount, which would lead to what? Equal sharing. Okay? They were good kindergartners. They passed. They shared equally. Okay? However, in some cases, there are atoms that do not like to share equally. One atom has a higher electronegative measurement, right? And therefore, it hogs the atom. Right? There's not equal sharing, more custody time on its side rather than on the other atom side. And that leads to a polar covalent bond. Why is this important? Why is it important that we talk about electronegativity and unequal sharing of bonds? What goes with that electron? So what goes with that electron if it's shared unequally? What's part of that electron? Charge. The charge. Okay? So you end up with a partial positive and a partial negative charge because the electron is not shared equally. All right? Let's go through an example. The best example of this is water. Okay? And we're going to talk a lot about water because the polarity of water, the fact that there's an unequal sharing of electrons, gives water its properties. So what is water made up of? What atoms? Hydrogen and oxygen. So here's our oxygen, our hydrogens. Okay? And they're going to share an electron. So here's hydrogen's electron. There's hydrogen's electron. Okay? And then they're going to share, here's oxygen's electrons. Okay? And then the oxygen has two more in its outer shell. Okay? And that's supposed to be a circle. Close enough. Okay? So this is oxygen's outer shell. Now, because oxygen has more electrons in its outer shell, it's kind of a big bully. It will cause unequal sharing of the electrons between oxygen and hydrogen. Okay? So I'm going to erase this real quick, and I'm going to draw them out down here. Okay? So this electron that hydrogen is sharing, okay, is going to end up spending a lot of time over there. All right, so if it goes like this, spends a lot of time in that, small amount of time over here. A lot of time by oxygen, less time on hydrogen. So if we said this was the difference, the boundary. Okay? So that black line up there represents the boundary between hydrogen and oxygen, the shells. So the red figure 8 is the path by which the electrons share or they move between the two atoms. Okay? They're still occupying both shells at the same time. However, they're spending more time over here. What does that do? More electrons over here gives a net what? Negative charge, and this is a net positive charge. Okay? So water, the molecule of water, H2O, you'll always see it drawn like this, right? And oxygen and hydrogen's on the other side. And this side of the molecule is positive, and that side is negative. And that's all because of the unequal sharing of the electrons between the atoms. Okay? So the properties of water that we're going to talk about is related to positive and negative polarity of water, and the positive negative polarity is due to the sharing, the atomic sharing of electrons. Questions on that? There's your water molecule in a very computer animated diagram, what we call a space filling model. so much better than I can draw, okay? That is H2O. Again, here's your positive charges, right? And a net negative charge there. Questions? Ionic bonds. Did we talk about ionic bonds on Wednesday? Yes. Okay? Ionic bonds, and this is sodium chloride. This is just diagramming the same thing we went over. Isn't it an ionic bond is a complete exchange of electrons from one atom to another. Some atoms, because of their stability, or because they have, let's say, because of their unfilled, or how the electrons fill shells, that outer shell may have 1, 2 electrons, and those electrons can be readily exchanged with other atoms that have 6 or 7 electrons in the outer shell, and therefore making stable compounds. When you have that, though, you end up with positive charges or negative charge atoms. Sodium ion. Why is it positive charged? Because it loses what? Altogether now? An electron. And an electron carries with it what type of charge? A negative charge. So that ion now is positively charged. It's also called a cation. So when you say cation, that is a positively charged molecule or atom. Okay? An anion is negatively charged, so therefore it must accept an electron. Okay? It must take one, it must have one more electrons than protons in the atom.
Which one is that again?
That's an anion right here. Okay, anion, negatively charged, has more electrons than protons. Questions on ionic bonds. Now those ionic bonds, those positive and negative ions, opposite charges tend to attract. Yes, you've heard that before? So sodium and chlorine, they kind of stick together. Okay? And they actually form this lattice work. What you see up there in yellow is sodium, and in green is chlorine. Okay? So they are positive and negative charge, and they attach to one another. Now, what do you know about sodium chloride? What is sodium chloride? Salt. What do you know about salt when you put it into water? It dissolves. Why? Because it's soluble, okay? What else? What do you know? All right, so this is an ionic bond. These two things are stuck together because of the attraction between what? Positive and negative charges. Now, if I put a water molecule in here,
So the water has more positivity, breaks it apart.
what do I know about water? It's negative and positive, right? It's polar. It's a polar molecule. So what's it going to do? It's going, not that it has more positivity, but it's going to disrupt that attraction between positive and negative charges. Okay? So by the okay? So there's your positive and negative. Now I'm going to put a water molecule in, I'm going to write it in the right way. And over here, why did I do it like that? How did they arrange themselves?
Positive is closer, or the positive of the hydrogens is closer to the.
Opposite charges attract, right? So now water's going to interfere with that, and then all of a sudden these things start to come off, and they're going to be surrounded by water. Okay? That, in a nutshell, okay, in a very summarizes why water is a great solvent. Okay? One of the properties of water is that water is a universal solvent. Sugar dissolves in water. Okay? Salt dissolves in water. Magnesium sulfate, Epsom salt, you name it. Lots of things dissolve in water, again, related to its polarity. Okay? Which brings us to what we call hydrogen bonds. Okay? Hydrogen bonds are not, they are weak chemical interactions. Now, it's a kind of a misnomer when we talk about bonds. So far, we've talked about bonds in terms of what? What has been moved or shared or electrons. Okay? This hydrogen bonds do not involve the sharing or movement, exchange, whatever of electrons. It has to do with the positive and negative charges that we talked about. Okay? So it says a hydrogen bond forms when a hydrogen atom, okay, a little hydrogen atom, covalently bonded to one electronegative atom, such as oxygen, and there's water, right, is also attracted to another electronegative atom. Did it say bonded to? Does that definition say bonded to another electronegative atom? Yes or no? No. So does that mean that the electrons are shared? Does that mean the electrons are exchanged?
No.
No. It just means they're attracted. What does that attraction result from? So here's this electronegative. What's this going to end up being? Negative and positive. And so now another electronegative atom would be water, right? Negative. You could put in nitrogen, NH2. Okay, that's negative. You could put a whole bunch of different things in there, and they don't necessarily have to be bonded to hydrogen. Any electronegative atom that carries a slight charge can form a hydrogen bond. Okay? So the book will kind of give you this 3-dot. That's kind of like the universal sign of hydrogen bonds. Instead of a solid line, which denotes a bond, usually a covalent bond, it's a dot. A dotted line, usually 3 dots, to show that there's a hydrogen bond there. Okay? Are hydrogen bonds stronger or weaker than covalent bonds?
Weaker.
Are hydrogen bonds stronger or weaker than ionic bonds? Weaker. Okay? Remember that ionic bonds still have an exchange of electrons, so that's a stronger interaction. Okay? So covalent bonds are the strongest bond. Ionic bonds are weaker than covalent. And then hydrogen bonds aren't really bonding, they're attractions, so they are weaker than ionic bonds. Here's your example. Okay? Hydrogen bonded to an electronegative atom in oxygen, right? So hydrogen's bonded to an electronegative atom in oxygen. That hydrogen is attracted to another electronegative atom, nitrogen, right? And therefore there's an interaction. Questions on hydrogen bonding. Okay? It's relatively weak. Okay? It is not a true bond. Okay? Now we've already discussed this, and we've basically scratched the surface of shape and function. And we've already talked about, in biology, there's always a relationship between structure and function. Right? Those are one of the 5 themes of biology we talked about. Here is the example of this in atomic or molecular structure. Okay? Understand that shape, form, and function are directly, intimately related between molecules, between whatever it is you talk about in biology. Okay? And its shape, a molecule shape, is determined by the structure of its atoms and how the bondings occur. Okay? One molecule will recognize another based upon its shape. And interactions of hormones and receptors, of enzymes and substrates, and so many other examples are dependent upon shape recognition. Puzzle pieces have to fit together. Okay? Square peg, round hole doesn't work. We have to have the right structure to identify each other. Okay? But molecules with similar shapes can have similar biological effects. Okay? Many of the, how many of you heard of the hormone Pitocin? What is it used for? Those of you who have heard of it. It is an oxytocin analog, meaning it is about the same structure of the naturally occurring hormone oxytocin. So, woman goes in and she's past due for pregnancy. Due date was a week ago, and she's just not progressing. Baby's not coming. And she's about fed up with it, and it's about time. Okay? She does not want to be pregnant anymore. What will the doctor do? We call induced labor. Okay? How do you induce labor? There's a couple things. They could mechanically break the membranes and break the water, like, water breaking, okay, which would naturally induce oxytocin, and then they will give the hormone Pitocin. Okay? So the analog of Pitocin. Pitocin will bind the same oxytocin receptors, and then will then begin to progress. Right? So they are the same shape or similar shape, and they bind the natural receptors and go from there. Okay? So a lot of what you do in terms of medications are structured based upon the naturally occurring structure. Right? So that they mimic and bind the same thing. Here's some examples of shape. Okay? No, you don't have to. I'm not going to ask you, give me the shape of, draw this out. That's for chemistry. Just so you understand shape. Okay? That these molecules we've been drawing in 2 dimensions are 3-dimensional. Right? They have to fill space. Especially that tetrahedron that you see up there. Okay? So the electrons just aren't flat on a piece of paper. They fill space. Okay? Here's another example of shape and function. Endorphins. Okay? How many of you heard of the term runner's high? Okay? So you work out, and at the end you're like, woo, that feels great. Right? That's because there's a natural endorphin release. You work out, it should feel good to you. Okay? Your body releases endorphins. It binds to molecules, binds to receptors on neurons in the brain, and makes you feel great. Okay? Awesome. How many of you know what morphine is? Okay? Morphine is an analog of the natural endorphin. It has a similar shape at this area, which will bind to the receptor on that brain cell and will elicit or start a similar response. Okay? Depending upon how much morphine's there and exactly how it works. Okay? So it stops pain from happening and a bunch of other things. Okay? Example of structure and function and the importance of shape. Does the endorphin receptor identify which one's which? No, because it's just a shape recognition. Okay, and so you could have inhibitors to this that will block the receptor. There's so many examples I could inundate you with them, but I'm not going to. All right? Hopefully you understand the relationship by those examples. Yes? Okay. So, we have bonds. We have covalent bonds, we have ionic bonds, we have hydrogen bonds. Okay? In some cases, we need to make bonds, but in a lot of cases, we need to break them down. Okay? So chemical reactions, they will build bonds, right? Bring two atoms together to form a new compound, or they may break bonds. Chemical reactions, reactants and products. So two atoms that come together, you get Na plus Cl, yields sodium chloride. These are what? Or sodium chloride is the product, NaCl are the reactants. Okay? Most chemical reactions can go both ways, right? If I put sodium and chlorine together in a jar, they'll react to a certain point, and then they'll reach equilibrium where there are so much sodium chloride being made, and then there's so much sodium and chlorine ions being broken apart, okay? They'll reach equilibrium. Excuse me. Here's an example. Two hydrogens plus an oxygen build covalent bonds. They react together and form two water molecules as products. You'll take chemistry. You may go into some of this, more of this, okay? I'm not really concerned with the chemical basics of it or you should understand the general idea that this occurs, okay? Kinetics, reaction kinetics, that's for chemistry. That's boring to me. I know about it, but it's boring to me. Okay? Questions? All right. Equilibrium. All right. Said that these reactions can go in the forward and the reverse direction, but when they reach a point where it's equally going at the same rate in the forward direction as in the reverse direction, that reaction has reached equilibrium. Okay? So the products are being made at the same rate as the reactants are breaking down, or the products are breaking down. Okay? I don't like this wording where it says all chemical reactions are reversible. Not all of them are reversible. Okay? At least maybe not in the natural state. Okay? Or you have to do things, put a lot of energy or effort to make them reversible. Okay? In the natural state, not all of them are reversible, but most of them are. Okay? Questions? Questions on basic chemistry? Gotta stop doing that. Clear as mud? If you give me the smirk, I'm gonna ask. Are you what? What's any questions? No? Good? Okay. If I get the blank stares, I'm gonna start going and asking more questions. All right. So the next part, I think this is after the start of chapter 3. Yes? I don't know. Anyone have their book with them? I don't know, I just go off. It doesn't matter. Is talking about the molecule of water and the fact that water and its properties support life. Okay? You know that without water, the earth would quickly turn to Mars. We'd be dry and it would be no living things. Okay? All organisms require water. Pretty right? And the fact that 75% of the world is covered in water, and that water's around, is what makes Earth habitable. Okay? There's our sad story of polar bears. Okay? Just a recent report, as of yesterday, and scientists have said that all polar bear populations, and all polar bears live in the Arctic or in Canada, all polar bear populations, the habitats of wild polar bears, are endangered. Okay? Are in danger because of climate change and melting sea ice. All right, polar bears are in trouble. Okay? But what do we see here beyond that? Look deeper into that picture. See a polar bear floating on some water. What do you see? Talk about what do you see in terms of water there, Stephanie? Samantha, sorry.
It's okay. You see two different forms of water. You see ice and water.
Ice and water, okay? And the fact that ice floats, we all know ice floats, yes? Okay. Is a property of water that is directly related to its molecular shape and its structure. And we'll go through why that is. Okay? So we already said that water has what type of covalent bond? Polar covalent bonds. So therefore it has a polar molecule and it has positive and negative sides. It has polarity. Okay? And that water molecules can form what type of bonds from hydrogen to oxygen? So what is this right here? A hydrogen bond. So now I can start, if I was to continue to draw water molecules, how would I have to arrange them? Or would they just randomly end up on the page wherever they want to be? Would there be some type of arrangement? Yes or no? Yes. Why? Because what? Because of the charges. And if the charge, so if I was to draw another one in here, would I have a hydrogen here? No, why? Because they're both positive, so it would kind of move it around, and I'd have to fit an oxygen in here somewhere. Right? Negative, positive, and then you end up with a hydrogen bond. Okay? Hydrogen bonds are weak interactions. And so all the water molecules that are in your water bottles that you have with you are doing this, interacting with one another, forming and breaking hydrogen bonds. The hydrogen bonds, the interactions between hydrogens and oxygens and the water molecules allow for water to be what we call adhesive. Okay? Means that the molecules can stick to other stuff. The raindrops on windshields, they don't just fall off unless you put Rain-X on it, right? Or some type of wax. Okay? It will stick there, and they'll have water that's kind of attached. Yes?
Is that why, like, there's that magic trick where you, like, put the water in the cup and then you pull the cup off and it stays and it's, like, shaped?
Yes.
Is that why?
So it will, with that and the air pressure that's above it. Okay? So you have, it kind of stays there, and no air's going in to allow it to come out. And then the water molecules stick to the side of the cup, and it holds it there. Okay? So you have, water is adhesive. It can stick to other things. It can also stick to other water molecules because of these hydrogen bonds. So not only is it adhesive and sticks to other things, it's cohesive, and it can stick to itself. Cohesion. Okay? these hydrogen bonds form. So if I have, you know, a nice little, well, let's minimize that. Give me a nice fresh sheet here. I have a nice, I have a bowl of water here. Hey, that's pretty good. Okay? And you kind of pour it in. You've ever done this, my daughter loves doing this in the tub, right? She's like, give me a bowl, give me a bowl, give me a bowl. Okay, fine. And she fills it up. She fills it up right to, it starts to look like this. She sees how much she can put in there before it starts overflowing. Why is it that it can go over and form that bubble before it starts to overflow? What's keeping the water here rather than going that way? Surface tension. Okay? Surface tension. And surface tension meaning surface tension meaning that there's something that's holding water molecules together. What is it? Okay? What you really see here is all these oxygen and hydrogens are bonded to get our hydrogen bonds. The hydrogen bonds are holding it together. So to overcome that surface tension, you have to overcome that hydrogen bond attraction. Okay? You get enough force that pops them apart, bloop, it goes over. Or what if I added, we did this little experiment, a little Dawn, a little dish soap to there. Then what happens? What do I do? Now it's a detergent. Okay, it's a soap, which has positive and negative charges. Gets in there, what does it do? It breaks that surface tension. Okay? And then all of a sudden, whoosh, starts flowing over. Okay, so we have polar covalent bonds or hydrogen bonds. We just talked about cohesion, adhesion, surface tension. Okay? And all of those things are related to the shape of the water molecule and its ability to form hydrogen bonds, its polarity. Okay? So we have cohesive behavior, right? Expansion upon freezing. Its versatility as a solvent we already talked about. And that's a result of its what? Its polarity. Okay? Cohesive behavior as a result of its polarity. And the other two that we need to talk about is the ability to moderate temperature and expand upon freezing. Okay? Because we know water increases or expands. It gets bigger when you freeze it. So if you put a water bottle in the freezer, right, and you close its cap tight enough, and it's full completely, right, you put it in the freezer, you leave it in there, that water bottle's going to expand and maybe break, right? We've all done that, yes? Why? Why does that happen? Okay? The water becomes more ordered, okay? Because what ends up happening is in your water bottle, you have water molecules, right? And they're kind of bouncing all over the place. They're forming and breaking hydrogen bonds all the time. Okay, so you have hydrogen bond that's here, and hydrogen bond that's there, and one that's there, and it's going. But now when you freeze it, those hydrogen bonds get stuck. Okay? They get stuck and ordered in a distinct pattern. Right? And it actually separates water molecules apart. And it becomes less dense than that. All right? Water density is at its highest, meaning most molecules in a given volume at 4 degrees Celsius. Okay? Water's ability to regulate and absorb temperature is also related to the fact that there's hydrogen bonds. So last night I cooked my daughter's pasta for dinner. They were very hungry, okay? My wife was out, so here we go. Okay, so pasta it is, quick. Start boiling water. What happens? Did it boil right away? No. Okay. My mom always taught me how to cook when I was a kid, and she always said, you cook pasta, you boil water, you got to put some salt in. You got to salt the water. Okay. And like any good Italian cook, right? Giada De Laurentiis, whatever you watch on, you salt the water. Okay. What happens when you salt? What am I doing when I'm salting the water?
Raising the temperature of the boiling point.
I'm changing the boiling point, right? Changing the boiling point of water. Why and how? What is salt? Sodium chloride, right? But when I put it in water, it dissolves, and what are those? And then I have sodium ions, chlorine ions. What are they going to do? They're going to disrupt these things right here. What are those? Hydrogen bonds. So if I just left water on the stove, okay, I got to put some heat into it. Eventually it's going to boil, right? In order for it to boil, I have to break hydrogen bonds. It takes a lot of heat to put in to boil water. It really does. Because there's all these hydrogen bonds that are formed, and they're breaking and they're reforming, and they're breaking and they're reforming. You have to get to a certain point where you overcome those bonds that are reforming in order for the water to boil and get beyond and go from a liquid to a gas. So those 4 properties, okay, we're going to talk more about the temperature on Monday. Those 4 properties, cohesive behavior, ability to modulate temperature, expansion upon freezing, and versatility of a solvent, are all due to one thing. What? The what of water? The shape and the polarity of water. Okay? The fact that there's a positive and negative side, which is directly related to its shape as a molecule, and it's the bonds, the polar covalent bonds. Questions on that?